Good morning, everyone. This is Kate Morley from OPWDD. We're going to get started shortly. We have a fairly large number of attendees this morning, which we certainly appreciate. I will ask that if everyone could please mute your line. We are getting some recordings that appear to be breaking through. We did ask that the lines be silenced for this presentation because of the large number of attendees. So we want to make sure that we maintain sound quality during the presentation. So just some logistical notes before we get started. We have our colleagues at the Department of Health who are joining us here today for this presentation. And this session will be recorded and available later in the day online along with the PowerPoint presentation. So that will be available. We are also doing a second session on Thursday evening at 5:30. That presentation will be the same as this one, so there's no need to register for both since that material from the second presentation will also be available. We are muting all lines during the call, and just to make sure folks could also mute their phones, that would be very helpful so that we maintain sound quality. If you have questions during the presentation, you can type them into the box. We will be addressing those at the end of the presentation for the time allotted. Our intent is to focus, depending on the volume of questions, primarily on questions related to how to submit comments for the transition plan, the purpose of the transition plan, and then the first phases of activity. The reason being is that the transition plan outlines several phases over a 5-year period, and there will be subsequent transition plan updates that will be subject to further public comment as we move forward in the process and through the years that are envisioned in the 1115 application. So we want to make sure at this time that we are focused most clearly on the activities for 2018. But please do type your questions into the box. We'll address them today to the extent we can, and we will follow up with written comments as soon as we can in the next day or so, particularly for those items that are most pertinent to the review in front of us today. So with that, we'll get started with the presentation. So the purpose of the session is to review the transition plan at a fairly high level, like we've done with other presentations regarding federal action. The purpose of this is really to assist folks in their review of the transition plan. It doesn't replace that review, but our object is to help people understand the document, how to navigate it, and what the purpose of the document is. So during today's presentation, we're going to be basically covering some of the logistics of the review. So we'll be addressing where you can find the transition plan and explaining the resources on the DOH website and the OPWDD website. We'll be reviewing the rules of the public comment period, when that period is open, and how to submit your comments. And then in terms of the content, we'll be delving into really what the transition plan is, how it's organized, and why we're doing this. And then finally, the key concepts in each of the 3 phases that are outlined in the 1115 application. So let's start at the very beginning, where you find the transition plan. We sent out an announcement on the 5th that the review period was starting, and with that we sent a link. The transition plan itself is located on the Department of Health website, so a message did go out to stakeholders with that link. You can also link to it by going directly to the DOH OPWDD 1115 site. You can also link to it through the OPWDD webpage itself, and there is an announcement on the cover page regarding its availability. So either site can get you to a copy of the transition plan. So the transition plan comment period, as I said, started on December 5th when we posted to the Department of Health website. We will be accepting comments through January 5th, 2018. It's a little over 30 days. We tried to tack on a few more days because of the holidays, but given our time frames, it's important that that we end on January 5th. Our intent is that we will be integrating those comments, evaluating those, and then by February 1st, our object is to submit a plan to CMS and have another public display of the updates to the transition plan and written responses related to any issues or concerns that are addressed by the stakeholders during the public comment period. So in terms of the logistics of submitting, we are asking that people submit comments via email. That's the easiest way to make sure that we have everybody's comments in hand. You'll see the email address on the slide. We ask that people use the phrase OPWD transition plan comments in the subject line. There's other uses for this email box. It's not exclusively for this event, so it would help us identify those comments in a very timely period and make sure that they're integrated into all the submissions that we receive from stakeholders. And to the extent to which you can reference a page number or a section of the transition plan when you submit your comments, that'll be helpful so that we can really evaluate how best to update the plan when we come to final submission. So, what is a transition plan? The transition plan is required by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, and it is a requirement of moving services to the 1115. It also is a requirement of moving services from Medicaid Service Coordination to coordination through our care coordination organization, Health Homes. So the transition plan really addresses both items. And it is an important document because there's lots of technical details related to the operations of our waiver services, like rate codes and restriction exception codes, and all the sorts of things that sort of behind the scenes make sure that services continue to be authorized and flow and providers are still paid for service. So you will see in this document that it is a technical document. There is information that CMS needs assurance from the state that those sort of business operations continue to happen, and if they change, how they change. So that's one of the purposes of the transition plan. It also, for the stakeholders, is an important way to communicate what is changing, what stays the same, and how those changes should impact the individual. So it is a technical document, and part of, I think, the purpose of today's presentation is to walk you through some of that technicality to assist in the review. So what I want to do is give you a lay of the land in terms of the transition plan, because I think that's helpful to know where you want to focus your review. It is not as long as waiver applications, which folks are probably accustomed to reviewing, which can be many hundreds of pages. This is a much more concise document. But nonetheless, I think it's helpful to understand how the document is organized. So at the front end, we have a purpose and overview of the document. Then the document is laid out according to the phases in the 1115 application. So the first phase is in greater detail than latter phases, and there's a couple good reasons for that. But between page 8 and 28 is the discussion on the first phase, and those first phase activities are the ones that will occur in 2018, so they're the closest to us. The secondary part of the document is phase 2 and 3, and that has to do with the development of first voluntary and later mandatory managed care enrollment. What we've tried to do in that section is to provide an overview of the design, but it is not yet in a period of great detail. One of the reasons is, and we'll review this in some detail, is there are other documents that will be subject to public review and comment that are really going to define some of those details. So while the transition plan sort of points to that, it isn't necessarily going to go into great detail because there will be other intervening public reviews that will be at a more detailed level. So I do want to point folks to some of the attachments because I think they will be helpful in people understanding what we're looking at, and I do want to take just a minute to talk about what they are. So first is a health home checklist. This is a document that we are proposing. It is just like the main body of the application, open for public comment. And it is literally a checklist that we are proposing that today's MSC service coordinators who are assisting individuals and families in our service system, that they will use when it comes time to transition toward health home services. So what we're really trying to look at when we make the transition to health home services is that it is a person-centered process for each individual, and it will really follow the existing transition that a person has related to the care planning. So what this checklist does is it outlines for both the service coordinator and the individual and family what the expanded services are of the health home model and what they can expect their services to evolve toward as we all begin to engage in health home services. So that's attachment A. Attachment B is a comparison of the health home comprehensive care management and the opt-out service, which is called HCBS care management, which will be authorized under the 1115. So I think there has been a lot of questions from stakeholders related to what that opt-out looks like. The proposal is captured here. There's also some text in the main body, but there's a chart that provides a comparison of the two, so folks should certainly take a look at that. Attachment C is a list of informational sessions that will be beginning actually this week for MSC staff. The list of potential topics or intended topics is included in attachment C. So folks should take a look at that. I think we're all very much understanding that the service coordinators today are a key center of the development of health home services, so we want to make sure we're having those conversations with folks as we're thinking about the transition towards the new model. So those services, those WebExes are intended for MSC staff. They will be open to others, but we really want to encourage MSC staff register for that, and it will be available for others on the website following the presentation. But they're short informational sessions that will be held beginning this week and for the months to come leading up to the transition. The next attachment is the health home implementation timeline, which goes into a bit more detail about precisely the elements that we are envisioning in terms of that transition. It is certainly referenced in the main text, but this just provides a little bit more detail to follow up on the discussion that is presented in the main text today. And finally, the attachment, the last attachment has to do with the life plan. And just to put that in perspective, folks all are very well aware of the ISP, or the Individualized Service Plan, which today is the care plan template that everybody in our waiver and everyone who receives Medicaid service coordination uses. The life plan is a new model that is supported electronically, but it includes many, if not all, of the same elements of ISP, but the template is provided there to give some guidance about how the new template looks compared to the ISP, and how we're really trying to make sure that we have a very person-centered approach that can be used universally and supported through information technology. And certainly more will be to come on that topic, but that is a resource for folks, and I want to make sure that people are aware it is at the very back of the document. So that's the lay of the land in terms of the document, and why don't we now delve into some of the key concepts that we present. So to start, at the purpose of this document, we are obviously in a period of federal and state discussion related to both the development of CCO health homes and the 1115 with a tremendous amount of work underway. The purpose of this document is to really outline what the transition will look like, what the steps are, and how the state is guaranteeing continuity of care for individuals, families, and providers throughout the transition process. So, as I said earlier, when you look at the 1115 application itself, we essentially now have 3 phases of activity. The first phase, which begins July 1, 2018, which is what we are obviously most focused on today, is phase 1. And the events of phase 1 are the development of our care coordination organizations, our CCO health homes, or CCOHHs, and the authorization of HCBS that is now provided through a 1915C waiver will move into the 1115 waiver. So we will be going through what that means for folks in a little bit more detail. But just to be clear, phase 2 and 3 have to do with later development. Phase 2 is really the initiation of voluntary enrollment in specialized managed care plans and what that means, and phase 3 is the ultimate phase of moving into mandatory services, which is slated for 2021. We will be going into less detail in phase 2 and 3 in this presentation. As I mentioned before, there will be subsequent documents that will be available for public comment that will discuss elements in those 2 phases. So what we've tried to do to make sure for ease of review and understanding is related to each topic. We have certain subcategories that are addressed consistently for each phase and for each action that's described in the transition plan. So for each, we have an overview. We discuss the purpose of the particular action. We outline the service and program changes. Then we talk about the continuity of care provisions for individuals, families, and providers. Then we talk about the administrative processes, operations, and oversight, and that is largely a technical discussion, but a very important one because it's how we will operationalize everything that we discussed prior. And then finally, a proposed timeline associated with the actions related to that phase. So throughout the document, that same outline is followed for each of the phases. We next in the document, starting on page 6, discuss some of the key stakeholder engagement opportunities that exist and the roles of our advisory councils related to the work at hand. And there are several of them that are active with us, in particular related to managed care, the Joint Advisory Council, the Transformation Panel, and the Medicaid Managed Care Advisory Review Panel, and UNCARP are some of the key statewide stakeholder bodies that are part of the development of specialized IDD managed care. So let's talk about phase 1. And just to put that in context again, phase 1 is slated to begin July 1, 2018, and will address the transition of our OPWDD 1915C services to the 1115, and also the transition to health home services. So let's start talking about the transition of the 1915C HCBS waiver and its funding to the 1115. Essentially what we are achieving on July is really the start of a transition and opportunities that we will have under the 1915C waiver that we simply do not, for 1915C services under the 1115, that we really do not have today. Today, for stakeholders who've been engaged with us in, the various amendments that we have undergone in the last, I think, 5, 6 years, we have had, I want to say, 11 amendments in that period of time. The waiver has gone from a roughly 200-page agreement with the federal government to well over 500 pages, and we are now at a point where the level of detail and specificity in the waiver makes it very difficult to operationalize and be nimble in terms of making changes. So the 1115, we think, is a big opportunity for us to begin a different conversation related to community-based services and its expansion. So we are We're very hopeful and that we can provide the kind of continuity that people expect and begin a different conversation that will ultimately allow us to have a more flexible delivery of services under the 1115. But it's first and foremost, our focus is really on maintaining continuity of care. So the move to the 1115 is not intended or designed, nor will it have any real impact in terms of the services provided, the providers delivering those services, or the way that they are reimbursed. So phase one, what we're trying to communicate here is what will be within the 1115 authority after 7-1. So within the 1115 authority, we will have a care management service, particularly opt-out service for individuals who choose not to receive health home services. The current HCBS services that folks now enjoy will move into the 1115 and will continue to be targeted to the IDD population. So what that means, that term targeted, means that individuals who are OPWDD eligible and waiver enrolled will continue to access the services that they do now. It's just the federal authority is going to be under the 1115. There is one exception. Plan of care support services will not be there. It transitions to the HCBS opt-out service, so the service does not go away. It's not technically going to be a home and community-based service that's called Plan of Care Support Services. Additionally, we are also moving into the 1115 our specialized state plan services. That includes our ICS, our day treatment services, and our Article 16 clinic, and our independent practitioner services for individuals with developmental disabilities, or IPSID services. In that regard, again, it is strictly a matter of moving it under the 1115 authority. Those services remain governed by the state plan agreements that are in place, so there really should be no impact in terms of folks' access to those services or the reimbursement methodology for those services. So on page 10, we outline the continuity of care provisions that are in place for individuals and families and also for providers. Again, what we're really talking about here with the transition to the 1115 is it is an opportunity to begin a new conversation and to think more broadly about how we can make enhancements to our service system. It is not, in and of itself, an immediate change in how the services are experienced by individuals and families or reimbursed or authorized in any way, shape, or form. So I like to think of it as what we are doing is we are packing up our existing services and our reimbursement and our administrative processes from the 1915C world, and we're moving it into the 1115. It starts a new opportunity as we unpack those boxes to think about how we can deliver those supports differently, more flexibly, and ideally with more streamlined administration. But in and of itself, there is no change in a person's access to those services. So in terms of the service and program changes, on page 16, the document outlines what the biggest transition, I think, that we had experiencing on July 1, and that is the move from Medicaid service coordination and plan of care support services to care coordination health homes and the HCBS case management opt-out service. So what will happen on July 1 is that our current targeted case management SPA and PCSS as a service will be undated, and folks have the opportunity to transition into one or the other of those two services. So in terms of the transition, everything that follows is really to make sure that at the end of the day, everybody on July 1 knows exactly who their service coordinator is, who to call for questions and issues, and we can begin the transition to a high-quality, integrated care coordination service that's really going to be a good thing for the folks that we serve. So the service and program changes are outlined beginning on page 17, and we have had, I think, several opportunities to communicate what these mean and what the new services are under the care coordination health home model. And there certainly will be more to come, including the start of the MSC information sessions that will be public for all stakeholders as we move through the transition. So the continuity of care provisions are described on page 19. So this is related to the development of health home services. It's a process that really is beginning now as we are looking at the applications for health homes. So as folks will recall, in June we published for information and for public comment the health home application, which was the application for CCOs to become health homes that are specialized in serving the DD population. After a public comment period, that was finalized and then published as final for applications. At this time, we have several organizations that have submitted applications to become health homes. We are reviewing them jointly with the Department of Health and will shortly be issuing initial designations of approved entities. And at that point, we can really begin a very public process whereby we will be informing individuals and families, working with service coordinators in today's MSC agencies on what the transition will look like and what the options are in each region. The good news is that I can safely say that we will have choice of at least 2 entities in each region of the state. So that's, I think, a good thing for individuals and families who are concerned about choice. But what we've tried to do in the transition plan is really outline a very public process of informing folks of what those options are and making sure that the conversations can happen with today's service coordinator to think about how to appropriately meet the needs for the ongoing care management for the person after July 1. So for individuals and families, I think there's a tremendous amount of detail there, both on page 19 and then also in the appendices as we discussed, there's an overview of the transition activities that folks can reference. For Medicaid service coordinators, we have raised the current qualifications, so we are raising the bar in terms of the qualifications for the workforce going forward. Our hope and intent is that we will have a workforce that builds on the strengths that we have today in terms of person-centered planning, but then is sort of raising the bar and making sure that service coordinators have the resources available to them to really assist people to better meet services across, in a comprehensive manner across all service systems. So with that, we are waiving the current care manager qualifications for existing Medicaid service coordination service coordinators. In addition, we will be offering required training that will be available through CCOs and coming up with a schedule for that training that will allow folks to really focus on the transition activities for individuals and families receiving MSC and CCSS, and then making those transitions occur on a person-specific basis in accordance with the person's ISP transition. For MSC service providers, the agencies themselves, during the first year of operation, agencies with appropriate firewalls may provide health home care management through a contract. Some CCOs may also choose to directly contract or directly employ care managers. After a year of operations, we are requiring that care managers actually be employed by the CCO health home, and they themselves may not provide HCBS services directly. That is one of the requirements of conflict of interest that we are meeting through this design model. It does not mean, however, that relationships with existing provider agencies are severed, anything but. So what we really need here and what we've tried to achieve through this design is that CCO health homes are established by today's provider in a cooperative manner. So we have groups of providers coming together to form the CCO Health Home, and that they can demonstrate there is a regional network that's hopefully going to integrate services better in a person's care plan and have the kind of resources that can be brought to bear to make sure we have an IT system that really supports person-centered planning. So a lot of work is going on now through our DDROs to outreach to existing Medicaid service coordination agencies to make sure that agencies have affiliated. But I do think it will be helpful for folks to know that it does not mean that all relationships with existing providers in the CCO end after a year. So, for example, it may very well likely be that service coordinators continue to have office space where they do now, so that we make sure we have the kind of connectivity that we want to have among OPWDD services. So we also have provided, I think, in the most detail to date, our plan for what the opt-out service is for folks who do not want to receive Health Home comprehensive care management, and that appears on page 24. So that we are calling HCBS care management. It will be authorized under the 1115. And the focus of the service is for folks who don't want comprehensive care management, and we do have some folks in PCSS today, for example, who have made that choice. And the focus of the service is on educating individuals about their freedom of choice that's available, developing and monitoring HCBS plans of care that are required in order to receive HCBS services, and performing annual level of care HCBS redeterminations to make sure the person remains eligible. The service will be authorized under the 1115, and the real focus of it is on the maintenance of a person's care plan and access to the HCBS services. Again, there's detail in the document itself and also in the appendices that outline the proposed payment structure and how the service differs from the more comprehensive model of care management that's available through the CCO Health Home. So with that, we'll move into the presentation on phase 2 and 3. And again, phase 2 and 3 are subsequent, obviously, to phase 1. And it describes the move to voluntary and mandatory managed care enrollment. So that starts on page 29 of the transition plan. And what we try to outline, I think, are the principles of the specialized managed care plans that we are intent upon developing in New York State. Much of the detail that stakeholders undoubtedly are looking to receive will not be in this document. We are working toward a qualification document that will be published in August, and that's identified on the timeline at the end of the section. And that's where we really talk about what exactly will make the IDD specialized managed care plan different than other existing plans. So by and large, what is going to happen is there will be other documents also open to public comment later in the year that describe those phases. We also anticipate that there will need to be updates to this transition plan as we move closer to those significant milestones that will also be open to public comment. The commitment of the Commissioner is very much that voluntary enrollment precedes any implementation of mandatory enrollment. So that is the basic model that you will see laid out in the pages of this document. So, broadly speaking, phase 2 and 3 starts in July 2019 with voluntary individual enrollment in plans that incorporate IDD services. There is a concept of an early adopter plan, which in late 2018 may apply for and potentially be approved to deliver a health service plan, so what we call a mainstream managed care plan. But at that point in time, for individuals with IDD, enrollment in one of those early adopter plans would be voluntary, and the plan would only be addressing the mainstream benefit package. It would not at that time include the IDD services. Again, before we can include the IDD services, there will be subsequent documents open for public comment that talks about how we would incorporate our IDD, our HCBS services into managed care. The second phase, or the third phase, is phase 3, which is the final phase of the 5-year 1115 application, and it's slated to begin in 2021. We anticipate that will be downstate, simply based on our footprint today with experienced managed care plans, most of them are in the downstate area, so we would envision that we would be implementing mandatory based on a regional rollout. That said, if we have early adopter plans that come forward in other areas, that may be one of those elements that we will have to evaluate as we move toward that final phase of implementation. So, when we talk about the 1115, I think that it's, some of the key constructs that we have laid out here are what I think of as really the key design elements. So what we're very interested here is, through the 1115 authority, being able to leverage the power of a value-based payment strategy. Some of the constructs that we have here is that in fee-for-service, particularly given our many hundreds of page application that includes over 100 pages of rate methodology, it makes a very, very structured and rigid reimbursement system. Through managed care and through the 1115 authority, we have some opportunity to really think more broadly about how we authorize services and how we structure services to be more flexible. And I think that's certainly an opportunity that, working with stakeholders, we want to make sure we take advantage of. One of the first matters that we are addressing through the 1115 authority is we are requesting the demonstration authority in order to seek federal reimbursement for our crisis management services. Their services now that are entirely state funded, so we have an opportunity to bring them into the 1115 and to demonstrate the value that provides when we're able to help folks stay in the community in the current services and with their families, as opposed to institutional placement through the development of and the delivery of these services. So that's one of our first examples of using the 1115 waiver authority, and certainly working with stakeholders, we anticipate that there will be more to come in the years ahead. The other thing that I think we tried to very clearly lay out is that for care managers, for individuals and families, and for our providers, we have tried to very carefully structure the development and the stages so that there is an opportunity at each stage to learn and gain experience before we move into more comprehensive services. So, for example, care manager, we are intent that through the CCO Health Home service, our care managers today will gain experience working in fee-for-service for comprehensive care planning for people. So it's really a way to make sure that the workforce that we have today, we can bring into managed care and really support person-centered planning at the very center of a specialized managed care plan. For individuals and families, we have a period of voluntary enrollment before managed care, and in addition, the full range of protections that are available today through 630-312, and in addition, those benefits that are available through managed care to ensure that a person's choice is honored as part of the care planning process. For managed care plans, we do think it is important that managed care plans have experience operating ED services, that there is an understanding of what debilitation is and the importance of that service in the lives of people, and we think that needs to start at the management level. So we do have a period of time where we would hope that qualified entities can come forward that have that experience. It may be, as we move into the wider implementation, that there will be other models of managed care, but throughout those, the expectation is that the CCO health home has a core role in delivering services and coordinating care for folks that need into managed care. There's also discussion of OPWDD DDROs, and they're working in collaboration with managed care plans as we prepare for and think about the transition from fee-for-service to managed care. And finally, for providers, there's a guarantee of payment rates for periods of time for the different services that are currently delivered. So again, to focus folks' review, on page 32 for phase 2 and 3, we start the discussion of continuity of care for individuals and families for providers. And I do want to focus on the existing commitments for residential services, that those continue to be paid at the fee-for-service rate, as long as that is described in a person's care plan. And for other periods of time, for other services, there's different periods of continuity of care. For providers, we want to work very closely with stakeholders to develop VDP strategies through managed care, because I think that's really the opportunity to think about how to better support people in more flexible ways than we can today in fee-for-service. So that's a walkthrough of the transition plan. As we said earlier, the PowerPoint presentation and the recording of the session, for those of you who want to hear my dulcet tones, will be available on our website. We're going to try very hard to get that up later today. We will be working on a Q&A document that will be posted, and we will do our very best to get that published in the next day or so. In the meantime, there is our care coordination mailbox, and earlier in the presentation, we provided the Department of Health mailbox link where the public comments will be submitted. We have a bit more time available to us, so what I'd like to do is take the next 10 or so minutes to review some of the questions that we've had to date. We are going to focus the time allotted on those questions related to the logistics of submitting comments and to phase 1, since that's the most immediate phase. And then if time allots, we will address the subsequent items. So,
where can we access the attachments that were referenced?
So the attachments are actually part of the document. So if you go to the link that we provided earlier in the presentation on the Department of Health website, if you scroll to the end, they're all part of the same document. So you can print them or review them online.
Is the draft transition plan available in Spanish?
At this point, I do not believe it is, but we can certainly see about making that happen and how quickly we can make that happen. So we'll take care of that. There is a question about whether OPWDD is going to get folded into, I assume the question was the Department of Health. It is not, and I think that gives me a chance to say a few words on the topic, because I know we often get questions about that. So first and foremost, OPWDD is a cabinet-level agency. Our commissioner, Acting Commissioner Delaney, reports to the governor, and that will not change. We are responsible for services for folks with developmental disabilities in New York State, and that, again, does not change. The health home model is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health, but it is a shared responsibility of our two agencies, which quite frankly is not all that unusual. There's a number of services where we have joint review. I'm pleased to say we've been working very cooperatively on the program design, and we will be working jointly as we move forward. So this is not a sign that the OPWDD is by any way, shape, or form going away. It is actually an opportunity for us, I think, to really step forward, make sure that we can take advantage of some of the opportunities that are out there for our population, and we will certainly be working jointly with the Department of Health in the future as we go forward for the betterment of our services and the people we serve.
Are there self-advocates and or parents members of the numerous advisory committees?
Yes, there are.
Just to clarify, care coordination will be a waiver service under the 1115 waiver.
Yes, so that's a good question. The opt-out service will be authorized under the 1115, and it is called HCBS Care Management. The reason being, it is focused on the care plan that a person would require if they want to receive home and community-based services, but do not want comprehensive care management.
Will all the approved CCO health homes offer the opt-out option of HCBS Care Management?
Yes. So CCO health homes, in addition to offering the health home service, will be required to offer the opt-out service. And for stakeholders, part of that education and decision process that we tried to outline in the appendices and then also in the main text of the document talks about that option and when individuals and families can make that choice and exercise that decision.
Who will provide care management for those who opt out?
So the provision of the opt-out care management will be provided also by the CCO health home. In this capacity, they would be the CCO HCBS service coordination provider. So the provider today will be today's Medicaid service coordination service coordinators who will transition to work with the CCOs and be delivering either health home services, the comprehensive care management, or the opt-out service, or both, based on a person's choice.
Will the requirement of HCBS care management be the same as the current PCS requirements?
That's a great question. If you look at the appendices, the attachments, I would direct folks there. We do outline the differences. It is very much like PCSS. There are some differences in terms of the training of the care manager. Obviously, will be transitioning, but by and large, it is largely like the PCSS service today.
Do we have dates for the informational sessions referenced in attachment C?
The first two have been announced. The first one is on Wednesday at noon. They're all at noon. And the next one is 2 weeks following that. I think that's the 27th. 13th and 27th. The remaining dates have not yet been announced, but will be. And again, just so folks are aware, we very much want to make sure that the intent of these sessions is to really address the concerns of the service coordinator workforce. So that's sort of our primary constituency for those sessions. Others are, of course, welcome to sign up, but we will be addressing the content mostly to those folks. And again, after the presentation, these will be available on our website for folks who are also interested in the topic.
If 7/1/18 is a hard date for care coordination to begin, when will OPWDD cease to accept MSC applications?
That is a good question. We would have to evaluate each situation. Accepting a new application has to include how the entity will continue work with individuals and families after 7/1. So a standalone application without a concurrent agreement with a CCO health home in terms of continued operations really cannot be approved at this point. It wouldn't be the right thing for individuals and families. So it's not that I think we can say absolutely no, but it very much has to include a firm commitment in terms of how that service will continue after July.
How long will opt out HCBS case
Oh,
management.
let me go back, because let me make sure I answered that previous question correctly. I answered it from the perspective of new end agencies, so let me just go back and clarify that statement. So in terms of new agencies that are applying to provide the service, that's where we really need to make sure that the entity that wants to begin delivery of that service has an agreement after July 1. We will absolutely continue to accept MSC enrollment for individuals throughout. There will be no interruption in that. What will happen is that during the transition process that we outline, part of the process for someone who is newly engaged in Medicaid service coordination would be also the selection of the service for July 1. So let's say you enroll in May or June, that enrollment would proceed, you would work with your peer manager, but part of that initiation of services would include the selection of the CCO health home or the opt-out service as part of that enrollment. So thanks for pointing that out, folks here, and sorry for the misspeak.
How long will opt-out HCBS care management be available?
There is no intent that opt-out HCBS care management end at this juncture, so it continues to be a service option for folks.
Initial eligibility for services is reviewed by OPWDD, often aided by agencies who send them packets for families and individuals. Will agencies still be playing this role?
That is a great question. The way we are looking at that is typically agencies do, yes, provide very important support to folks at the front door when we're initially establishing eligibility for HCBS services. That is most typically through the Medicaid Service Coordination offices in the agency. So we are looking at that function transitioning to the CCO health home. So agencies will still be engaged with that, but it will be moving into the CCO as happens today, typically where it's part of the agency's Medicaid Service Coordination delivery. But that function will absolutely continue, and the front door role really continues for our CDRO staff.
Are caseloads changing because of the different levels?
We have 4 tiers, and this is most clearly described in our application that is also available on the DOH website with links to it from our OPWDD website. And they're at the highest tier, which is frankly a pretty high payment level. It is much higher than our current reimbursement. There is an expectation of a caseload of no more than 20 individuals per care manager. So that is a caseload that must be strictly adhered to. For the other tiers, we have not set goals, but we intend to, or levels, but we intend to watch those very carefully, and if we need to, we will. But we wanted to give some flexibility, especially initially, to look at what service levels are. But I do want folks to be assured that the very lowest health home reimbursement rate is higher than we typically pay for Medicaid Service Coordination services. So our expectation is not that this is that there will be radical changes in caseload associated with this transition.
Will addendums need to be done to all ISPs to discontinue MSC and add CCO?
That is a great question. I think we will have to address that in the transition plan. I anticipate not. I think what we want to encourage is that folks, that there are other ways that transition would be documented in the care plan, including the checklist, so I don't think there would be any need to separately document that. So I think that's a good suggestion, and one we can make to sort of reduce one of the administrative steps that we would need to take.
Going back to the tiers, Can providers have caseloads of mixed tiers?
Yes, they can. We will need to provide guidance in terms of what that means if there's one person with 20. I think what that means is you can have a mixed caseload, but the case manager cannot handle more than the 20. So that will have to be very carefully thought through in terms of how that service is operationalized.
Will there be a commitment to best practices for achieving goals?
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. And I think if you look at the template that we have for the life plan, really what we're trying to do here, and I know it's a challenge because we're talking about IT, and I personally find it very hard to envision how IT works. Anyone who works with me and my laptop understands that. But what we're really doing with the life plan is we're making it a very person-centered process where a person's goals and objectives are really central to the planning process. It's not that they aren't now in good person-centered planning, but we're really moving into a world where IT really supports that and I think empowers it. So we are very much interested in making sure that the care planning process is dynamic and is really helping people achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And that's, I think, one of the powers of looking more broadly at the life plan. And obviously not something we will achieve day one, but I think a very powerful tool for us moving forward to make sure that we are continuing what I think, quite frankly, in our system is excellence in terms of person-centered planning. So we have probably time for one last question. And the last one I will address is there is a question for whether the formula has been developed yet to determine how individuals will fall into the various tiers. Yes, it has. It is published. It is part of the application process. The application, there is an attachment to that document that explains exactly the methodology for assigning folks to the various tiers. But again, I want to stress to folks that assignment of the tiers is really geared to making sure we have the right payment to the provider. It does not diminish the care management that an individual receives by falling into one tier or the other. So with that, in the interest of time, I want to thank everyone very much for your attendance here this morning. We certainly appreciate it. We look forward very much to receiving your comments and suggestions related to the transition plan so we can make it a better document and more helpful both to CMS and our transition, but more importantly to stakeholders as a tool to understanding the steps that we intend to undergo. We will get this PowerPoint and the recording of this session out for folks ideally later today. And we will be working on a Q&A, which we will try to get out very quickly, but given that we are in the midst of our public review, we're going to focus most clearly on those elements that are related to submitting comments into the first phase, since we will have opportunity for later phases to address more fully as we proceed through the transition process that's outlined here. So with that, many thanks to everyone, and we look forward to talking again.